countdown whenever you're ready.
It's 1:59, so I'll wait.
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll sit in awkward silence for like 20 seconds.
Oh, are you? This is good actually. Alberto, make sure you're in the frame where you want to.
Yeah, I think we should be fine.
Just
Yeah.
double check.
All right.
And we're talking about Southeast Asians, not just Hmong people.
Not just Hmong. No.
Okay.
We did just
There.
October.
Yeah.
Yeah, with
in
my
October.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There may be like a question or two where we like
All right.
home in on Hmong
Yep.
experiences, but
I'll be just sharing
Broadly.
that too, but
Yes.
yeah. Mhm.
I'm gonna press the go live button in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alberto Villafan. I'm the digital producer at Sahan Journal. Today, during our Instagram live discussions, today we'll be discussing how members of the Southeast Asian community in Minnesota are responding to a ramp up in ICE's deportation push. I'm here with a guest who is at the center of supporting the Southeast Asian community impacted by immigration enforcement, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. Why don't you say hi to our audience today?
Hi, everybody. My name is Montha Chum. I am the executive director and a founder of Minnesota 8. We were formerly the Release Minnesota 8 campaign, so a lot of folks know us by that. And I'm also a refugee. Myself came here to the U.S. in 1984 as a baby.
Can I ask where you came from?
Well, my ethnic background is Cambodian, but our families escaped the war and genocide of the Khmer Rouge. And so then I was born in a Thai refugee camp called Khao Dang in Thailand.
Thank you so much for sharing, Montha, and I'm really happy to have you here today. If you're we're also excited for everyone who's going to be joining us live today. If you have any questions while you're listening to our broadcast with Montha, please feel free to share them into the chat. We'll be sure to ask them during our broadcast today. So to begin, I think it's important for us to give the audience a sense of what is happening right now. And I know that's a loaded statement. There's a lot going on. But this year, Sahan has reported on the ramp up in enforcement across Minnesota. On Tuesday, November 18th, we saw a federal raid at the St. Paul Wiper distributor Brotex. And for the past several months, our reporters have told stories about families watching their loved ones get arrested by ICE and then later deported. Montha, you know this experience firsthand. Could you share a bit of your story with us and why you started Minnesota 8?
Yeah, so 9 years ago, my life literally changed overnight. Like, my brother was detained by ICE and 7 other Cambodian men. And they were detained kind of just abruptly, right? Like they were going in for normal check-ins, and then they were just detained and taken away from their families. We were a group of women and children who had never organized before, didn't understand why our loved ones were even being detained, and told that they were going to be deported to Cambodia, which is a country that most of them have never even set foot in, because just like my story, the majority of them were born in either a Thai refugee camp or like the Filipino refugee camp in the Philippines. And these are people, both men and women, who had crimes that were committed like decades old, some even 30, 40 years ago. I call those crimes of poverty, because when we came to the U.S., because I actually just want to let the audience know and really be clear that like, our people, the Southeast Asian diaspora, our people are here because of war and genocide. It is not a privilege that our people are here. And so a lot of Americans or a lot of people get that story mixed up, and they will say, yeah, but you came here legally and like all these things, but it still wasn't a privilege. We came here because America secretly bombed our countries, and to date, Southeast Asia is the most heavily bombed countries at the hands of the United States. And the reason why Minnesota 8 exists is because when our loved ones were detained, none of us were prepared to understand what was even happening, because most of these individuals, actually all of the 8 that we were working with, had already rehabilitated, rebuilt their lives, had families, bought homes, have been at their jobs for many, many years. My brother, he broke a window and was facing deportation. He had already served his time. And like, when you think about communities of color and the sentencings that they get is like 3 or 4 times worse than a white person would get. I mean, again, he broke a window, served his time, and then decades later was faced for deportation. And so we continue to do this work because I realize now that like there's actually power in all of our voices. We all have this right to be able to exercise our duties by speaking up and supporting our loved ones when these injustices happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand, like, very few people immigrate to an entirely new country, uproot their life because, oh, it's a fun thing to do, you know? I come from a family of immigrants. I know my grandparents did not choose to come to the United States because they thought it would be a joy to try crossing across or from southern Mexico. You know, these are economic, cultural, or very unique cases where people have to leave.
Right.
Extreme cases. I know this work is very personal for you, and your organization is at the forefront of this type of work. Montha, I'm sure no day is the same for you. Every day you're tackling new problems, new issues. But when you get calls about federal raids happening in Minnesota, you know, what is going through your mind?
A lot. It's, you know, I shared that it's so personal for me because this happened to my family under this administration, you know, in Trump 1.0. And, and now what we're seeing is it's even more egregious, right? It's even more difficult for families to prepare and figure out what they can do. I mean, you just talked about what happened 2 days ago. And as I've been talking about it, there's just so much pain that goes through like my body. I'm sensing a lot of, I'm trying to understand the things that are going through my body, so I can't even imagine what these families are going through because I understand what they're going through. So I'm reliving the trauma, and I'm trying to find the best ways to be able to help families figure out a solution or what to do. And it's really hard to be able to do that when crisis is all you can think about, and in the moment is all that you're able to think about. But we are reaching out right away to fellow partners like at the Immigrant Defense Network. So Minnesota Aid is also a part of the steering committee. So we were there, like my staff was there, and then we held the vigil yesterday. But we're thinking about what are the best ways that we can help families when they come to us. We're thinking about the solutions, like if there is an opportunity for them to be able to get rid of their cases, you know, get rid of or vacate their cases. We're also thinking about how can we help the loved ones and the children at the moment when this raid is happening. But really, it's like we're also activating and mobilizing our community to show up because there is power in the numbers of folks who show up to defend and support the people that are being detained.
So I have a quick question about like perspective.
Sure.
When the Trump administration first came into power, I was only like 16, right?
It's crazy.
Yeah, right. So I understand. Like I'm baby. I didn't really understand fully the scope of what was happening or really how severe it was, especially compared to now. So I can you help me understand like what is the difference between 2017 to 2025? Like what's different in the air?
Sure. And are we just talking specifically about the Southeast Asian community in this case?
Specifically in the
then?
Southeast
Okay.
Asian community, yes.
Sure. So when that happened at that time, I don't think that the government and this is kind of just my own assumption, so I just want to be really clear about that, is that we had a much longer time. So our campaign lasted over a year, right? So the first of the 8 was detained at their ICE check-in on August 26th of 2016. My brother went in and did his check-in on that following Monday, the 29th, and then was detained. But at that time, we went to anybody who would be willing to listen to us to think through what is the best plan and how can we help support our communities. Trump's administration didn't fully come into office yet, and at that time, there was a lot of things that I think they were also still learning under this new president. I think Trump has probably had an opportunity to think through maybe more of his agenda and how things can move forward and how they can quickly deport people. And so they've been kind of maybe in communication. I'm not sure. But what I can say is from August to August of 2017, we were able to actually win the release of 2 of the 8, and unfortunately during that time 5 were deported. And then my brother, because Trump's office had officially then went into office, appealed it to the BIA. So even though he was granted relief in May, he actually didn't get released until September of 2017. So a little over a year. They had a lot of time, we had a lot of time to plan, organize, strategize. Now what we're seeing is when somebody in the Southeast Asian community is being detained, I think the back end is they're trying to do what they can, and they're also making community members try to get their own travel documents so that they can be deported. But they're still doing it really quickly. So from since then and now, you can see that folks are being detained, and then within like 6 weeks, probably at the latest, 6 to 8 weeks, like people are getting deported.
It's all moving a lot faster, smoother of a machine, right?
Yes.
For anyone just now tuning in, first of all, hi, my name is Alberto Villafan. I'm the digital producer at Sahan Journal. I'm here with Montha Chum, Executive Director of Minnesota 8, an immigrant advocacy organization in Minnesota. We were talking about the impacts of immigration enforcement on Southeast Asian Minnesotans. If you have questions for Montha, please feel free to ask them into the chat. We'll be sure to get to them when we get to them. So given the drastic changes from the previous administration to this one, Montha, how are you preparing your team and community members this time around?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've shared it a little bit already, but we've been doing a lot of different trainings, a lot of different like community safety planning, so a lot of family preparedness. We're also connecting folks with legal resources, and again, thinking through the strategies of how we can help community members. We're providing emergency support to those that are detained and deported, along with their families who are left behind. And we continue to build community networks. And again, like I said, locally, we are part of the Immigrant Defense Network. And so we continue to mobilize and work with one another to prepare and work with families.
So during our last Instagram Live, we talked extensively about the deportation of Hmong Minnesotans with attorney Nang Mua. If you missed that conversation, you can view it on Sahan Journal's YouTube page right after this broadcast. Mua spoke about Laos accepting deportees after new pressure from the Trump administration. Within the first 6 months this year, the Lao embassy has issued travel documents for 145 U.S. deportees to be accepted into Laos. Typically in the past, about 10 U.S. deportees were accepted each year into Laos. According to Mua Her, consular officer at the Lao embassy in Washington, D.C. Montha, are you getting similar reports for Hmong American deportees?
Yeah, so my Nang and I work really close together. She's actually our board chair. She's the person that represented my brother during his case and won his release.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think that we work together, so we're sharing the data. We're working really closely with Collective Freedom, who is the folks that are on the ground in Laos, and then we're working with the Ba Lo Project, which are the folks who are on the ground in Vietnam. And so we, one of the biggest things in terms of Laos in general, as my Nang had shared in the last Instagram Live that you all had, is that previously, the Hmong folks only had, they were really protected, right? And because of the administration right now and looking at the history, the Laos government never accepted Hmong people. They were not accepting Hmong people, but because of the pressure, they're doing that now. And we have seen an influx in Minnesota. Our community members, the majority of the folks that we're working with right now are actually Hmong, because of the large population that we have in Minnesota. So the data is what she shared is still accurate as it pertains to Hmong. But we do know that just in this just a couple days ago, there was actually another flight that did not go to Laos, but it did. There was another flight that probably had another 100 folks that went to Vietnam.
Okay. Can I ask why they went to Vietnam instead of Laos this time? Or?
So right now they are. I have my notes somewhere, but they're just trying to get as many people as they can, right? It's just their data, and because there is a repatriation agreement already with Vietnam, it's easier for them to do these multiple flights and then to send folks to like Cambodia or Vietnam. So I'll share about that really quick because I know my name didn't really touch on that. But so in 2002, there was a repatriation agreement that was signed between Cambodia and the U.S., right? It was a 2-page document that was signed that says that folks, can be repatriated based off of the different laws. In 2008, the Vietnamese people saw what was happening to the Cambodian folks, so then they did an 8-page document on the repatriation agreement. In there was a clause around pre-95, right? So folks who came as refugees couldn't be, deported, et cetera. But in 2020, then they changed the language, and then they did start to accept pre-95 folks. As far as the country of Laos, there was never a repatriation agreement signed. There was just a gentleman's handshake that happened in the latter end of 2018, or sorry, the latter end of 2019. And so that's why in 2020, right before COVID, we saw that, a lot of Hmong people and Laotian folks were getting, really scared. But because COVID had happened, people weren't prepared and there was just no preparedness happening at that time. And now when we think about, post-pandemic, 5 years later, and then Trump 2.0, it's happening. And because they're trying to meet their quotas, and within the Southeast Asian countries, the Laotian government was the least, had the least amount of folks being repatriated.
I want to backtrack just a second because
Okay.
I forgot to ask. You mentioned like training sessions and preparedness, family readiness, like trainings. Can you explain to me what goes into those training programs? Like, what are you teaching people? How are you preparing people?
Yeah, so I want to be a little bit cautious about some of the things that I am sharing when it comes to that. But I think the biggest thing for us is really teaching folks to know their rights, right? So that they don't, sign any documents without having an attorney, that they know that they don't need to open their doors for anybody who comes to the door unless it's actually a signed warrant by the judge, not just like a administrative warrant, which we have seen like a lot of folks do, that they can remain silent. They don't need to have. So we're sharing those things with them. We're also helping families think through their family preparedness, right? So like if a loved one, does get deported, thinking through what DOPA looks like for them, because, there's just a lot of things that go in when your family is being separated, thinking about the kids and the future, like long-term planning on what does it look like if we want to be able to bring our loved ones to go meet their mother or their father overseas in the event. And that won't be able to happen if we're not prepared. So thinking about their assets, thinking about all of those things, preparing for that, preparing for ways to be able to secure like housing instability. When all of these things are happening with their loved ones, we think about all of the different resources that Minnesota 8 does provide to be able to think through like long-term planning, not just like the crisis planning.
So we know that other Southeast Asian communities, not just Hmong, are being deported and impacted by the changes in immigration policies under the Trump administration. Montha, do you know the rate of deportations for other Southeast Asian communities?
Yeah. I don't have it in my notes here. However, if I remember correctly, actually, I'm just going to pull it up on my phone. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. So I'm going to go back as far as, I just want to share broadly. In the United States in general, there are over 15,000 final orders of removal to Southeast Asia. And then, so I'll go back to maybe just we'll work on just in May. So start in May. So in May, we saw the first Southeast Asian mass deportation flight that departed 65 folks to Laos, 93 to Vietnam. And then in June, after the administration, there was a partial ban. Then we saw the increased pressure then in the Lao government. And then that's when we saw in June and July, we saw the big impact here in the state of Minnesota, right? So that was where a lot of community members came to Minnesota 8. And we worked really closely with a huge population in the Hmong community beginning in June. And then that's when our regular trainings and community safety planning had happened within our community.
Mm-hmm.
In July, there was a Vietnamese national and a Lao national that was actually deported to Eswatini. And so that made it even more difficult for our organizers on the ground. One of the things that a lot of our communities in the Hmong population here, we filed a lot of we didn't, but we're filing or claiming like asylum, which is really true, right? Like they're stateless folks, right? But the country is Laos. And when we think about that, we would say, well, we want to file this, et cetera. But now we're like, we can't have our community members use that anymore, because if folks are being deported to third countries, it's making it more difficult for us to organize to get them to at least to Laos, right? If not back to the U.S. And so we are reminding folks that it's really important that right now this administration is even deporting people to third world countries. In August, you all had reported on this too. We ended up having a really large event that happened at the Freedom Library, the Eastside Freedom Library, because of the mass deportation that happened in August. And our people were then, our Minnesotans were then, they were being transferred across the country, and then ended up not being deported yet, though, until just very recently. In September, there were more community members. There was approximately 120 Vietnamese folks, 70 to Laos, and then 5 to Cambodia, with a total of approximately 200. And then in September, there was major situations that were happening with green card holders, even folks who were applying for U.S. citizenship. And then in October 2nd, we had a small deportation flight of 8 Vietnamese folks that ended up being deported. And then in October, I mean, the list keeps going on. It's sorry.
No,
there's a lot.
fine.
And then again,
It
I just mentioned,
keeps going.
we just happened in November, as like the early November, 150 folks.
Thank you. Jesus Christ, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Sadly, we need to move on a little bit.
It's okay.
Sahan has reported stories about children watching their parents get arrested and then later deported. I can still recall the Ring video camera video of Chia Neng Vu being taken in front of his family. Sorry, I'm just thinking about this. Some of our listeners may not be very familiar with the deportation process. Could you share with us what you've heard from community members experiencing deportation? What is that process like for them?
It's difficult. I think when you talk about them specifically, they came to a couple of our family gatherings, their loved ones. And it's sad to be able to hear and see the voices of the mothers, right? The elderly folks.
Real quick, could you speak into the microphone a little bit?
Oh, sorry.
No worries, you're fine.
Yes. So seeing so it's intergenerational, this work, right? And when they come to our events, we see like the elderly mothers who don't speak the language or understand, and we're doing a lot of translation. And then you see the wives or the husbands, and then the children, and the sleepless nights, or the being afraid to go out and just get regular resources like food or groceries or whatever, because of them just constantly looking over their shoulders at what could happen. People are they're looking for anything possible to be able to help. And one of the stories that I think is really important to share is that one of the individuals that were transported to Alexandria in Texas, being staged to be deported, was a person who was in a wheelchair, right? And the loved one here that we were working with just didn't even know what was happening, if her father was going to be deported, or if he was getting the medical needs that he needed while he was detained. And so there's just a lot of angst that goes into this, while they have no idea. I mean, it's very difficult when people are being transferred from one facility to the next. We're tracking them through an ICE locator.
It's easy to lose people through that locator
Yes.
too, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then what happens that if you do lose someone, if you lose track of someone, like how do you stay in contact with your family?
We're just waiting for them to reach out to us. And then there's a lot of resources that have to go into that because they may not have gotten their money. They may not have, like they have commissary, right? But when they're being transferred, we don't know where that stuff goes. And so we're dependent on the families kind of keeping us updated on whether or not their loved ones are deported. We're working again really closely with Dr. Tao and Collective Freedom, who's on the ground in Laos to see if those individuals actually did arrive there. But the process is really, really difficult because of even the way that the government works out there when our loved ones are being deported.
So it's clearly a long and winding process for people to be deported. But when they do eventually leave the United States, how do you stay in contact with them? Do you still stay in contact with individuals?
We right now, if we're talking about right now, we're not still in contact with the individuals that are recently deported, especially to those in Laos, because it's very different for those deported to Laos versus someone deported to Vietnam or somebody deported to Cambodia. So in Cambodia, they have a structure, right? There's an infrastructure that has been built there with Cavao, who has been in the past helping to receive people, helping them to get documents and things like that, so that they can get jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But then in Vietnam, it's still very like a communist country. We have Kat, who's working down there, working with folks, even though they don't have a big infrastructure yet. They have more resources where they've been working as a part of the Ba Lo project. But Collective Freedom in Laos is actually led by those who have been deported. If you guys remember the first woman that was deported from Milwaukee, Ma, she is actually one of the main persons that is on the ground helping provide resources to the new incoming deportees in Laos right now. And so I saw your face, but the structure is very different because of that. And when folks are being deported to Laos, they're in like a military base for X amount of time, even though Collective Freedom brings the resources there to provide to who we know are going to be on flight or coming there. We've realized that they're scrutinizing it a little bit more now. They're exploiting our people a little bit more and things like that. And, we're thinking through what sponsorship and stuff looks like. And we, Minnesota 8, only has access to that because of our relationship that we're building with Collective Freedom.
Before we dive into what I want to know what exploitation looks like and sponsorship does. But before we get into that, I want to remind anyone who's just now tuning in, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alberto Villafan. I'm here with Montha Chum, Executive Director of Minnesota 8, an immigrant advocacy organization in Minnesota. Today we're talking about the impacts of immigration enforcement on Southeast Asian communities in Minnesota. If you have questions for Montha, please feel free to ask them in chat. We'll be sure to share them with our audience later. So Montha, can you define what exploitation looks like in Laos?
Yeah. So exploitation can look like somebody saying that they will sponsor one of the individuals that are being that have been recently deported or displaced again there, and then saying that they're going to provide them all these resources, et cetera. But then they don't, and then they just take money from the families that are providing it. So that's one way of exploitation. Another way could be like, maybe, and I don't know, this is again only reporting back on what we've heard from our partners and some of the families that are still in communication with their loved ones. And so exploitation could also look like the federal government knowing that they have loved ones that want to help or support them that could potentially try to ask for additional monies. We don't know what that looks like because we're talking about the government there, right? So I don't know what that really looks like.
So basically when someone is sent to Laos, I was going to say sent back, not back. When someone is sent to Laos, they are basically rebuilding their lives from the ground up. Montha, does that individual receive any support from organizations like yours or the foreign government or even individuals here, a successful sponsorship, if you will?
So there's actually not anybody that can sponsor them from here over there. So typically, and this is pertaining to any of the countries, but really, but right now in Laos, it's in order for somebody to be able to come out of the military base, which is like the place that they have to stay in there, like at least for 30 days, then they're transferred to a different, facility until they get sponsorship. People have to understand that the sponsorship, so like if a family over there is being sponsored by someone, ultimately they're responsible for the person that they sponsored, meaning that if they get into trouble or something in the future, like they are the ones solely responsible for that person. And so the sponsorship only happens over there. And what that means is that then they get to be removed from this military place or the long-term military place.
So then I guess I'm still a little confused. What does, post leaving the military base, post those 30 days, what does rebuilding a life in Laos look like? Do you know?
I actually don't really know how to answer that, but I can share that the sponsorship really is to get folks out of there. Then they can get papers to look for a job, to look for, maybe housing, things like that, et cetera. But rebuilding their lives, that's the difficulty within our communities, right? Like most of us don't speak the language. So most of us have never been in those countries. Most of them don't even have families, especially the Hmong community, right? Like in Laos, most of their family members no longer live in Laos. And so that's the difficulty in that. And that's why there's exploitation that happens because if people can try to get money of any source, like any way that they can, they will say that they'll do these things for these people, and then nothing actually happens. And we have seen, and I'll share just like from the Cambodian community and in Cambodia, is like the amount of folks who have already been deported since 2002. There is a good chunk of folks that either have committed suicide, some who have completely disappeared. There's a very few amount of folks who have been successful to be able to rebuild their lives. But then there are still folks that are out in the streets because they don't have the resources, don't understand the language, don't have any family.
Okay, we're about halfway through our broadcast now. This conversation is going really fast, and I'm sorry we may not have time to get to everything. I'm a little bummed. So, as you know, once a family member gets deported, the entire dynamic at home just changes. Montha, do you know how families are adjusting to these changes? Are they finding ways to stay connected with their loved ones still? Or what happens at home too,
Yeah. So folks are just being uprooted, right? And I talk about the diaspora. And so like our communities had to learn how to migrate when we came here. Those who have been deported are learning that very thing again. They're being displaced all over again. And it's been really difficult. So I can talk about the original 8, right? So like we still communicate with them today, and we still stay in contact with the families that are still here. And it is very challenging. There is a community member who to this day still has never seen his son in person because his son was born just a few days before he was deported. This was one of our original 8. And he is also a success story in Cambodia, but that's because the resiliency in him and seeing his mom, do what she did here. But mom is getting older and mom is struggling, but they stay in connection, like, through Signal or through WhatsApp or whatever. Like, there's a lot of different apps that overseas countries are using these days, and so they're staying in communication in that way. The uniqueness of our organization is that not only do we continue to support those who have been deported, we also continue to help their families in the best way that we know how, and if they're willing to accept the resources that we provide.
I'm going to do my best to stay as composed as possible. I'm sorry. Thank you, everyone, tuning in. If you are just now joining us, we are talking about the deportation of the deportations and immigration enforcement impacting Southeast Asian Minnesotans with Montha Chum, the executive director of Minnesota 8. If you have questions for Montha, please ask them in the chat. Thank you. The Southeast Asian community is, of course, not a monolith. Changes to immigration policies and enforcement impacts groups very differently. Montha, can you help our audience understand how different Southeast Asian communities are being impacted and how they're reacting?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I want to be clear, like, we are here because America was there, right? Deportations in our communities look very, very different. It's really important to understand, or for folks to understand, that the Southeast Asian Americans that are facing deportation are because of convictions that were committed decades ago. And these folks have already, reestablished their lives, and they're facing double punishment. It was first like literally through the criminal justice system, and then through deportation or immigration. I also want to, and my name may have already mentioned this. I didn't go look through the whole thing, but when people think or see the word aggravated felony, they often associate it with like very harsh, egregious crimes.
Of course, my first thought is like murder or something.
Yes,
right?
and I shared with you all that my brother was facing deportation because he broke a window at a bar during a bar fight because somebody like attacked him, right? And because he was sentenced to a year in prison, even though he only had to serve 40 days, for immigration purposes, because of that 365-day sentence, it was considered an aggravated felony. And so therefore, he was deportable under immigration law, even though on a state level, he was only charged with a gross misdemeanor.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, when people don't understand this.
It's a window at the end of the day, and it could be escalated to such a...
But it was property damage, and it was the amount of property damage. So people really need to understand that. And so, our communities really need to be recognized as people that, really deserve second chances. When you think about a lot of the folks who were, just think about, murderers or sex offenders, things like that, who are American citizens. Oftentimes when they're released, they go back and do the same thing, right? But then our people, they don't even reoffend, but then decades later, they're being faced with deportation because of them not having citizenship. One might ask, well, why didn't they get citizenship? Well, let me tell you, when our people came to the United States under this, what people thought was a privilege for us to be here, which it's not, our families never got to really process the trauma that they experienced because of war and genocide. Our parents came here and was forced to go to work, all of these things, to be able to just, my parents, when they passed away a few years ago, they were never able to get off of assistance. And I think it's just challenging when we lump everybody in one category and think that they all deserve to be deported because they committed a crime. Yeah.
To say the least, we're living in a tense time. These aren't easy decisions for anyone to be making. Citizenship is not a straight line.
Right.
And on top of that, like you're saying, people are experiencing intense levels of trauma, fear, anxieties, on top of the fear and anxiety of possibly being deported. We received an audience question via email about mental health. It reads, how has deportation affected Hmong Americans' mental health, knowing that they would be at risk of being detained and or maybe removed from the country? And we can expand this question to Southeast Asians as a whole as well. Could you share how deportations are impacting the mental health of Hmong and other Southeast Asian communities?
Yeah, I think with anybody, when you experience this level of trauma, mental health, for one, is a stigma in the Southeast Asian communities. We, for a long time, were told not to talk about the issues, not to talk about the pain, et cetera. And so I think right now there's so much mental health concerns within our communities because so many people are going back to substance abuse, or there's so many different types of addictions that are happening because they're doing whatever they can to cope with the crisis that's going on. And what we have seen is that a lot of our community members our constituents who we've been working with are really struggling with drinking alcohol or something. And then that kind of leads us back to this bill that folks are trying to pass where like one person who has a DUI could actually be deported, and so the mental health issue is real. We are trying to work with partners like Wilder Foundation, culturally specific licensed therapists, to be able to help our community members really talk through the trauma and the shame and the fear that they have, instead of internalizing it and then allowing themselves to maybe even harm themselves in some ways that is not necessary because of the pain that they're struggling with.
So people listening may be worried about their loved ones getting detained and will want to support them. This week we received this question: what other resources would you provide to them if they are worried about being detained? And Montha, could you share with listeners the resources that Minnesota 8 and other local organizations provide?
Yeah. So as I just mentioned, we do work with different partners that have culturally specific therapists that can talk with them about the experiences that they're going through. We are also doing we actually are offering mutual aid and care packages within our direct services work. We've also been providing housing support through our housing program. There are a lot of instability that's happening right now as folks' breadwinners are being taken away, right? And so those are some of the resources that we're providing right now for short term. And, we are thinking through what long-term support looks like for our community members as well.
I guess I've always been a little foggy on how we define culturally specific therapy.
Sure.
Can you inform me on what that looks like, what that means and feels like?
So I can't just go to a white person and share the trauma and the diaspora of what my families went through and the war and genocide, right? They're not going to understand. They're not going to be able to pull out certain things to best support my mental health by figuring out what is the root cause of some of this pain that I'm experiencing. Yeah. So culturally specific for me, and I'll just share from my own experience, is that I need somebody, if you're not culturally identify at the same as me, but as long as you understand the history and the stories, that's very helpful then, to be able to have somebody who really understands what your community's experience was. So that's when we talk about culturally specific support, that's what we're thinking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, there's a reason why I sought out a Latin American therapist.
Yes.
There are only certain issues and experiences that someone who looks like us can relate to us, can actually really understand. We often have legal experts on these live shows offering at least some advice on how to stay safe. What are your basic rights? How should you interact with ICE? Could you explain some of the most important things about knowing your rights and how to stay safe in these interactions?
Sure. I'm going to refer folks to the Minnesota 8 website, but I also brought with me here some information.
Here, flash them right in front of your face.
Oh, sorry. So this is our Know Your Rights, kind of like broad. Oh.
Yeah, like in front of your face.
Literally in front of my face. So like this. So we have this one, which is really, it's compiled by Minnesota 8 with some attorneys and other partners. But it really is just like letting folks know that, again, they don't have to open the door. They can ask for the individuals at this agency to identify themselves, asking for warrants, et cetera. We also have the handbook for constitutional observers. This is more for folks who aren't directly impacted, but for folks who really want to be activated, who want to be able to really exercise their rights as the democracy and being able to go out there. The reason why, so I'll go to 2 days ago on the 18th, right, when this war happened just down the street from here at Brotex, it was because so many of us here in Minnesota have been doing these constitutional observer trainings through our larger network, the Immigrant Defense Network. And so folks know that they can go out there and they can videotape and they can, exercise their rights. And that's what we're calling folks to be able to do, is to go out there and do that. Folks showed up in 12 minutes when we first got the call. And the crazy thing is the fact that, these agents had police like on their, but none of the St. Paul Police Department even knew what was happening. And it's just so crazy. I mean, that's a whole nother thing, but yeah.
I'm going to have to ask to read one of those after this broadcast is done. But where did you say people could get some of this literature?
So you can get the literature from Minnesota 8, so www.minnesota8.org. That's our website. There's a lot of resources, and it's also culturally specific. It's in language, so we have our website. If you go all the way down, you can toggle, and you can actually go and look for our resources or the whole translation of our website in like Cambodian, Vietnam, Laos, Hmong, and I think even Karen right now. I'm not too sure, but we have the diaspora, Southeast Asian diaspora languages translated for sure in there. The Constitutional Observer training, we are holding that regularly with our partners at the IDN, but Minnesota 8 also is doing that as well.
And I guess, can you go into a little more depth on what bystanders can do as a constitutional observer? What should they be doing?
Yeah, so you can get involved in so many different ways. You can connect directly through Minnesota 8, or you can go through COPAL or a lot of our other organizations here in Minnesota. But I think the biggest thing is I'm actually gonna it's a whole little booklet, y'all. It's really, really awesome. But there's different things. Like the first thing is really to observe and document. And some of those things that we think about is like making sure that you're identifying yourself as a constitutional observer. That's like the first thing that you want to be able to do. You want to stay safe, stay away from, the ICE agent so that you don't have any reasons recording it, because you have the right to record, making sure that when they're saying certain things to you, like you're recording like the fact that you're taking steps back, all of those different things. So we can share more about that when folks get activated and show up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you so much to everyone who is participating in our conversation today. We've got about 15 minutes left in our live. In case you were just now tuning in, we are here with Montha Chum, Executive Director of Minnesota 8. We have been chatting about the basic rights during an interaction with ICE. We still have time to answer your questions for Montha, so please send them into the chat. We'll be sure to ask them right away. Many Southeast Asians arrested and being deported now were convicted for decades old infractions, things that happened in the past, right? We've seen the Trump administration and some in the Southeast Asian community focus on the past criminal histories of those facing deportations as a way to justify and make their families shameful or afraid to speak up. What do you feel like are important conversations that need to happen in the Southeast Asian communities for folks to understand these nuances? I know that's a broad question. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Can you repeat that? It was a lot.
Trying to find a nice, easy way to simplify this question. I guess, what are the conversations you're having for people who do have a past criminal conviction? How do you prepare people saying okay, this may be something that comes up in, this may be used against you in the current sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How do you have these conversations?
Yeah, I think everybody is really scared right now. It's really important for families to look at the human dignity within their loved ones and people that they're encountering. You can look at me and have an assumption. I can look at you and have an assumption, but there's a story behind every person, every human being. And it's really to understand their stories from their lived experience as they arrived as children here in the United States. Again, most of these people have never reoffended, but their convictions are decades old. Mm-hmm. And I think the most important for folks to know is that think about even yourself and the experiences that you have. I talked a little bit earlier about the H875 bill, right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to pass that bill right now. And just think about everybody right now who may have had a DUI, but because you're a citizen, and let's say that this law passes, you're safe only because you're a citizen. Mm-hmm. But if you aren't a citizen, and if this law passes, people who are not, even if they're legal permanent residents, they can get their green cards ripped away and then be deported. But does that really criminalize them, or do you look at them and say, oh, they're an aggravated felon, they have done all these, like awful things? But no, they may have just had one DUI and now they're being deported. So it's really thinking about that and then talking through planning with families so that we're not dealing with crisis or being reactive, but being proactive.
There was it's not advice, but so much as it was like a word of wisdom that an English teacher gave me in high school. She told me that we are more than the worst things we've ever done, right?
Yeah.
I guess, what do you have to say to that thought?
Well, I agree, because I think about my brother and I'm like, at the time he had a 4-year-old daughter, right? And she had to see her dad through this literally thick glass, like this thick, and she was crying. She had no idea why her dad was being detained because she had never seen him get into trouble, right? And so it's really just looking at folks and knowing that they have a story and that they are not defined by a crime that they committed decades ago. And that, I don't know, I mean, this is where it gets really emotional for me, because I just think about how many people deserve second chances, and how many people, say that, this person is this or this person is that, but like nobody should be deported to a country that they never set foot in or even understand or speak the language just because of a mistake that they made, a long time ago.
Thank you, Montha. We are getting close to the end of our broadcast, but I still have a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
These are just some more summaries, okay? And thank you so much for joining us today. I
Yeah.
want to let you know that I really appreciate you being here. Montha, I know no 2 days are the same for you, but could you walk me through a general day in your life right now?
That's a loaded question, y'all.
Yeah, I figured as much.
In these last 2 days, it has been very difficult because of what recently happened. But a day for me is, I wake up and the first thing I think about is our community. Like, has more people been detained? I just think about those things and how are we going to help the next person today? How are we going to help somebody who's facing eviction? Or how are we going to help somebody who doesn't have food on their table because of, their families being uprooted, or because of the government shutdown recently that happened? I mean, we're thankful, right, that a lot of our community members have been able to get their stuff restored, but like just things like that I think about. And then talking to attorneys, I'm talking to other organizers, just thinking through how do we best plan for our community so that this doesn't continue to keep happening, and how do we really help to settle and calm them.
Montha, I only have 2 more questions for you, all right? As we look ahead to December and 2026, I'm curious what you see ahead for your work at Minnesota 8.
Okay, this one I really, really, really was like, I really want to make sure that I answer this question really good. But now I don't even know where I wrote it. But I think I just want to say that there's a reason why my husband prayed for me before I got on this call. So I'm going to just share it, right? So as I think about the way we're going to prepare, is that we know that the deportations aren't going to end overnight. This is going to continue to happen. So we're thinking through how do we best prepare our community members so that we can think about how do we support them now, both short-term and then long-term preparedness. We want to be, we are working on different policies to try to be able to stop all of these things. But policies take a really long time to pass. I mean, we can try to push it through legislation for years, right? Like we have done with like post-conviction relief for NSA. Like, it's still not going anywhere, right? But what we do know is, as we continue to build relationships with elected officials, because they have been really great, at least here in Minnesota, we've been building the relationships, but just thinking through how can we work really closely with our elected officials, with our community partners, with our legal teams here, to be able to think through the best way to support our loved ones in the long term, whatever that looks like. And we know it's possible because we've seen it happening even without legislation passing. It's just a matter of building these relationships.
Do you have a note card for me, Hannah? Okay, I think I've got something written for just a second.
Okay.
Let's read this real quick. Thank you very much. Montha, as we close out our broadcast, is there anything else you would like to share with us today?
I just want folks to be able to see the humanness in people. That's the biggest thing. And also those of you who, I meant to share this earlier, so I'm going to share it now because I just thought about it. Those of you who are educated, who may be shaming those individuals that are in your families or in your circles because of the crimes that they may have committed, I want you guys to actually maybe think about thanking them, because those people, even like myself, people don't know this, but I got into trouble and stuff too, right, because of the way I grew up. We were misunderstood. We were bullied. We went through a lot of trauma. Our parents didn't understand what we were going through coming here as children, and they didn't understand the American culture, but we were in the schools and just told to just keep our mouths shut. And because of that, they started to label us gang members, etc. But I want people to recognize that those that were labeled gang members or that were misunderstood, to just give them a thank you, because they may have been the ones to get in trouble, but for you to shame them now is not okay, because you were able to get your education, you were able to do these things because of those people that they labeled thugs, etc. And so I'm thinking about, I wanted to name that because that was actually something that one of our impacted leaders shared with us, is that it's awful, and that's why so many of our community members lived with that shame and guilt and was isolated for all of these years, because people in their families even shamed them, but they actually should have been thanking them because they kept them out of trouble. They chose to be the ones to get in trouble for them to be able to have an education, etc. And I think the last thing is for those of you who are listening or those that will be listening later on YouTube, is the fact that, like, there's always such a need for folks to be activated, to come out, to support, learn how to organize, learn how to be a constitutional observer, learn how to just be there in support of those who are on frontline workers, and then also check in on us, check in on me, right? When those of us who are getting and receiving all of this pain that people are experiencing, we're holding it, but we don't have a place to really share or dump it. So just check in on us to see how we're doing too. And come check out our website and figure out how you can get involved. Minnesota 8 is also a political home to a lot of our Southeast Asian and API community members. And so, like, if there's a need and you want to learn more about this work, please join our Freedom Village member program.
Montha, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate having you here with us tonight.
Yeah.
And tonight, it's 2. Thank you all so much for joining us today on our Instagram live feed. Special thanks to our wonderful guest, Montha Chum. Montha is the executive director of Minnesota 8, an immigrant-led advocacy and anti-deportation organization. We will post a recording of this full conversation on Sahan Journal's YouTube page later this afternoon. Additionally, we will publish a recap of this event highlighting key takeaways for the conversation. As always, be sure to stay up to date with the latest immigrant updates and other news impacting immigrants and communities of color in Minnesota at sahanjournal.com. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you, Montha.
Thank you.
You guys were great. The camera work was so funny.
You guys, I was so distracted by y'all.
So sorry.
I was like, I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm trying to save time for you to get back to the microphone.
Oh, you were doing God's work, to say the least.
You were talking
I
and
was
real
like, she's doing so great while we're trying to figure this out.
We're in
You
real
were
time,
saving
and
my
then we
ass.
delayed like 15 to 20 seconds. So
Oh.
you got out of frame a little bit, and then we fixed it.